pause, and then we're going to go into today's session. So really quickly about today's show, we are recording this session. So there's both going to be a version in the video format and inside of a podcast format. You can see both the links for the video options in the podcast, where you can find those on the screen. Gavology, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, on the podcast platforms, Anchor FM, Spotify, and then I think those get distributed out to some other platforms. So those are some areas where you can find this episode. Actually, we're going to get that on in about a week here. But if you want to look at any of our past episodes, you can find those there as well. And we do this show a little bit unique. So basically, we record a live session here on a topic, on an issue that somebody's having. And you have the ability to submit those issues to us by going to the website, gavology.com/issues. By the way, that's also the page where we post all of these video shows as well. And you can register for upcoming sessions. So those of you who have joined us today, you figured that process out. So welcome. And what we're going to do is, once we are concluding our show today, we're going to cut, and then we're going to go to a post-show Q&A. So when we cut, if you're on here live with us and you want to ask a question, don't go anywhere. And you can ask a question on any topic. So we're going to have a specific topic for the day. But if you have a question, anything that you want to ask, we'll be here to answer those for you. Also want to invite you to continue the conversation at Gavology Nation. That's our private LinkedIn community. So if you go to gavology.com/nation, you'll find it there, and it'll bring you right into our LinkedIn group. Just go ahead and request access and we'll get you in. Last but not least, check out federal-access.com/Gavology. That was a page that my co-host had set up for you guys. If you want to get some free access to some pretty cool templates and some other things that's going to help you out to build that GovCon toolbox of yours, I definitely suggest you check that out. So without further ado, I would like to welcome my co-host today, Mr. Michael Lejeune. Michael is a partner with RSM Federal. And of course, I'm Carol Bernard. I'm the CEO of Gavology. So if you guys give us a minute here, we'll let me stop my screen sharing and we'll proceed with today's topic, which is on procurement readiness. So the title of this episode, we said a lot of people's issues is that you're not ready or you don't feel ready. And a lot of people don't feel ready, and rightfully so, because procurement readiness is a really hard thing to define. You know, if somebody came to me and said, what do I need to get to be procurement ready? The first question I would probably go back, or the comment that I would go back to them with, was like, well, it depends. And then there's a series of questions that I would proceed to ask that person about, okay, what are you trying to sell? Oh, sorry about that. We're going to start over a little bit. So I just recognized that we just started the recording. So yeah, welcome to this live episode of the Coffee and Issues podcast with Carol Bernard and Michael Lejeune. Today's topic is procurement readiness. And so Michael, and I know we just mentioned this just now, but I'm going to say it again because we weren't recording before. But if somebody were to ask me, what does it take me to win contracts with the government, or what do I need to do to become procurement ready? Because I've heard that buzzword being used around the government marketplace. I really, truly don't understand what that means, or how do I get there for me? And I understand why that is a hard question to answer. And my first response would be, it depends. And it depends on what you're buying, who you're trying to sell to. The VA has developed actually a procurement readiness guide, which has all kinds of checkpoints on it, like get your SAM registration, get your certification, get a capability statement, watch SAM. Those are all good things to do, but some people don't even require that. For example, if you were to sell a product on Amazon and the government happens to be buying from Amazon something, you might not even see them coming, right? So they may actually be able to purchase that product with you unintentionally. You weren't registered on SAM, but were you procurement ready? What did it take to get you procurement ready at that point? Well, the ability to accept credit cards at that level. At other levels of higher up, you need to maybe get registered at SAM. But I wanted to share with you a story of ours, and something that I've also observed as I've worked with contractors, a lot of contractors over the years, and it's a very common thing that happens. You see this great opportunity that you open it up and you're just like, oh my, this is perfect for us, but we can't go after this because of this other thing that you just don't have at the ready. But I want to turn to Michael real quick. And Michael, I'm sure you've seen this a lot as well in both your career when you were doing government contracting from some of the clients. Do you want to share maybe a story? We can start out maybe with a couple of stories, because I know you've got one. And I'm guessing that you've got one that maybe you can share on an example. And I want to share one of mine. And then what I'd like to do is kind of go into some suggestions on things people can do to really make themselves procurement ready. And what I really truly like to call it is opportunity ready, because really it's going to be more specific to an opportunity than just an overall, I'm generally procurement ready for everything. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really good topic. And, I found there's a couple of different types of people. There's the people that really prepare and do all their due diligence and get ready for what they're doing. And they ask a lot of questions. Those people tend to be the slow starters, but have a lot of the answers. And then there's people like me who just start. And so I'm usually compared to the guy that jumps out of the airplane and, builds the parachute on the way down type of guy or whatever, right? Like, I'm just going to get started and I'll figure it out as I go. That's kind of how we do it. And so like when we got into government contracting, it was 20 years ago. I don't even know if SAM existed then. I believe it did. But for us, it was like, we're just going to go 100 miles an hour and we'll figure it out. And so as we were doing it, there were a lot of mistakes, like, how do you respond to an RFP? And then at the time we were selling a product that we were the only people in the world that made it. So we got to bypass a lot of that stuff. And so people would come to us and basically say, I have a sole source contract for you. Really just sign here. That's kind of how a lot of my government experience was in the beginning. But then when I moved out of that and started looking at other types of businesses, that's just not the way it works. And so when it comes to like the stories there, one of the biggest things that I find for most people is just knowing how the government buys what you sell. Because you mentioned a couple of different places to be registered. SAM is obviously one of those places you need to go in and get that done. But you may not realize that if you sell product, you need to be registered in DIBS. You may not know that if you're in the trucking industry, there's this massive IDIQ that's being run by this one company, and you've got to go register through their website to become a vendor. And so to me, the biggest part of like the procurement readiness up front is being able to understand how and where does the government buy what I sell, so I even know where to register. That's like step one, because I do, in each of those examples I just gave, we've had clients come to us and say, why aren't there opportunities showing up on SAM? They're like, well, let's do some research. And you do research and like, they're all in DIBS. Or somebody comes and says, no opportunities in SAM. Oh, they're all on this trucking website, or they're all in this other place, or are they not using that? And so just depending on what you sell, SAM may not be a place where you can buy anything. And Carol and I, you and I talk about this all the time. You're only going to see the scraps on there a lot of times anyway. But depending on what you sell, there's going to be one or two or other websites where that's where all of the action is for your business. And if you've never heard of it, how can you chase those opportunities? So,
you mentioned DIBS, which what does that stand for? I remember
that is DLA's Internet Bid Board System.
Right. I wanted to make sure I got that acronym right.
Yeah.
But you brought up a great point with that, because not only, first of all, it's like, where's the competition happening? So you need to know that. But secondly, the requirement to basically sell a part in the way that the Defense Logistics Agency procures that part.
Yep.
They have to go through the process. So you get onto DIBS, but you're still not procurement ready, perhaps, because maybe the government says that we're buying this part number under this national stock number. And in order for you to be able to sell under this national stock number, your product needs to go through an approval process, make sure it meets all of our very specific requirements, especially if it's military. Because, the last thing, the military wants to have happen is to have jets falling out of the sky because
Right.
they procured a substandard product. So it can be very complicated to get to that level, and it could be very simple. And that's why I think that the answer to procurement readiness is so hard, because it's really dependent upon, what you're selling, how big the acquisition is going to be, what's the level of risk that the government is dealing with when they take on a small business supplier. And so they have to look at all of those factors, right?
Right.
So I wanted to kind of share our story, because we also go after government market opportunities. And when I say government market opportunities, a lot of times I'm talking about not only federal, but also city, state, local, county, port, school district. There's all kinds of government agencies out there. And so I like to speak to that as a broader sense, And really what I feel is that there's a level 1 procurement readiness where it's like a baseline procurement readiness. And I like to think about the level 1 as like an agency specific. So if you want to do business with the federal government, okay, go through SAM. Typically, that's your starting point. If you want to do business with like the city of Austin, right? What is their vetting process just to get you in the pool, just to get you in the door? So if you're doing construction, for example, what does procurement readiness probably look like for you at the city of Austin doing construction? They probably want you to get registered in their vendor portal. They probably want to see some bonding and insurance and a few other things. Also, that you're not on the excluded parties or the debarred contractors list, right? So if you can meet those check boxes, you can be procurement ready to do business with the agency. Now, that doesn't speak to opportunity readiness, right? So now when they put out a big project, maybe it's a $5 million construction project. Well, to be ready for that opportunity, you've got to have $5 million in bonding. Or there may be some other factors that will require you to basically step up and provide a higher level of compliance, a higher level of financial means. And this is what makes it so hard with procurement readiness. And that's why it's so hard to really define it for one person on a general sense in a guide or in a call, because it really needs to be looked at a specific level. I want to share a quick story, Mike, because, for the last 5 years, we've been going after some small opportunities, really on the subcontractor side. And that's what I tell a lot of people that are very micro enterprise. Like there's a lot of businesses, that are small businesses, but a small business could be $30 million or 500 employees, or it could be, $5,000 with 2 employees, so that's also a big gap, on where you're starting from. But if you're starting small, you might want to look small and start to go after some things that you can basically do, you can digest, you can perform it well. And so we've been doing this for a long time, and working with different agencies, both directly and doing a little subcontracting. But somebody shared with us, there was a big opportunity that was really right up our alley. And we're like, we read the requirements, we read the scope of work, and we were like, we can do this. So let's do it. And so we went through this process, and this one kind of came out of left field on us. I wasn't tracking it, which that's something that I always preach in some of the training that we do, is to forecast, because if you can forecast, then you can study the opportunity. And what I mean by studying the opportunity is going and look at historical competitions. What happened in that competition? Who won? Why did they win? What did that solicitation look like? Now, if you can go back, and this is pretty easy to get without even asking for a formal FOIA request and a public records request, you can drill it back to the person that awarded that contract and say, hey, can you share with me the solicitation that was on that that last competition, and also who were the incumbents? And then you can start to study that. And what you can look at is, when you take a look into the solicitation, don't just look at what's inside of the scope of work, because you're like, we can do that. Look at what's in the other requirements. For example, does it require a DCAA compliant accounting system? If it's a cost-based contract, does it require you to develop labor rates that you maybe don't have already? Does it require that you have to change the way you essentially do accounting for your business? Do you have to be CMMC level 1 ready? So every opportunity is going to bring a different challenge, but it's your job. And if you really want to get procurement readiness, and this is what happened to us, ultimately, that particular opportunity that we were very well capable of doing had a requirement to submit audited financial statements. We didn't have that. We even hired experts to help us out, CPAs that specialize in GovCon. They were like, you just don't have enough time. Even if we wanted to do this, we can't get audited financials done in a 30-day solicitation window. When you take out, the weekends, you got like 21 or 22 days left. And so these solicitation periods are very short. And the very frustrating thing for a lot of small businesses is that the government, and especially the federal government, buys in a lot of 5-year contracts. So if you're not ready when that solicitation hits, you might not have another opportunity for the next 5 years, right? So that's why I tell people, especially the folks that want to get into those multi-year contract vehicles, to really start taking a look a couple of years in advance. Start to break down that solicitation, start to actually build your content like you're going to go after it. And if it has these special requirements, like cybersecurity or audits or whatever it is, get your product certified. You have enough time to do that. Or maybe you find that you can't go it alone, but you need to do a teaming or a joint venture arrangement. Those things take time to put in place as well. And when you can put time on your side, the less that you're in this frustrating situation of the perfect opportunity comes open, but then you can't pursue it. So, Michael, what are your thoughts on what I just said there? And, also, again, I know that you've probably seen some of your clients be frustrated with some things that they saw the perfect opportunity maybe, but couldn't pursue it.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest frustrations in government contracting is exactly what you said. Like, hey, we're perfect for this, but we don't have time for the audit. We don't have time for this compliance. We don't have, and the checklist is endless sometimes of the things they don't have. And the reason they're in that position a lot of times is either they're brand new, or like I've got a client right now that's been in GovCon for 3 or 4 years, and they've just started branching out from their original client base. And they're like, as we're trying to expand into new clients, new customers, there's all these requirements that we didn't have before. And the first time they're finding out about it is there's an RFP, it's on the street, and they've got 3 weeks to respond. And my thing is always, look, I get it. If you can get ready, get ready. If not, use that as your checklist. I mean, we've got to use it. We got to start somewhere, right? So let's use it as a checklist. We had a client just the other day that came to us. They sold like residential and commercial appliances, but they only sold in a couple of states. There was like Missouri, Illinois, and Kansas, I think, were the only states they're licensed to sell because they're like a distributor for somebody. And my advice was, number one, who buys what you sell? Like, who buys what you sell? Let's figure out, like, in the government, who's buying it in those states. And then let's actually figure out who's buying what you sell. So there's the agency perspective of it, or the client, the top level, but then there's who within that is actually buying that stuff. Because their challenge was, well, I just want to call the contracting officers at Fort Leonard Wood and get them to buy from us. Like, what if they don't buy your thing? Right. And so, like, for them, when we looked at the data, we were like, oh, why is a contracting officer team out of Huntsville making all these purchases for these 3 states? And there's nobody in those 3 states buying it. And it's because there's a contract vehicle that is run out of Huntsville, and that's the team buying it. So in order to get procurement ready, we had to identify the who, then we had to identify the how, and then we had to figure out, can we even get on this contract vehicle? Because if we can't get on the contract vehicle, it's going to be 3 years or however many years. And so that's where the research phase is so important up front to procurement readiness, because I do see a lot of people that are kind of like me. You dive in head first, but then you go the wrong direction. You start going down this path, and it's like you're talking to the wrong people because you don't know who you need to be talking to, what your checklist even looks like. And so I think you can save a lot of time on the front end and really streamline your procurement readiness by doing that research. And it's all free, whether you're using SAM or USA Spending. I use both. I'm bouncing data off of that. And I'm building my procurement readiness checklist based on that, because I'm not just looking at historical data. I'm looking at opportunities and saying, what are they requiring? What are they requiring on these opportunities for me to do business with the government, even if it's not in a client or a region that I want to work with, because I want to see what the government in general is requiring. And then I think we're talking in a way where you could use this at any level, but I prefer the Fed market to the SLED market. You may have to do this for both markets. So you may have a checklist that says on the Fed market, here are the 6 things that I need, but on the state market, here are the 9 things I need for California. Here are the 11 things I need for New York. Here are the 4 things I need for Arkansas. Like you may have a state by state checklist as well that you're going to have to create. It just depends. Again, that's why I like the Fed market. I've got one major checklist that I'm focused on versus the multi-state market and systems that I need to be registered and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, we also had, Michael, a person who did submit an issue, which is sort of relevant really to this topic. And they were a construction firm. One of the frustrations that they've got is that they're, don't have a big team and they don't have a lot of finances behind them, really. So it's like they're kind of caught in this crux, like, well, what do I do? Like, because if I'm doing all the admin work, I'm not in the field making money. And so there's a lot of those small owner operators out there that are like that. And in that particular situation, you may actually choose to do more SLED work. Again, SLED's state, local education. But why would you might do that in that particular situation? Well, let's say you did your research. You're looking at both markets overall. What you found in the federal side is a lot of the construction opportunities go through big 5-year contract vehicles that basically there's none coming up in the near future. And you're not even ready to tackle usually these are like $50 to $99 million contracts, but then they will give you small contracts throughout there. It doesn't mean you're going to get $50 million, right? So those are hard contracts to win, and they only select maybe a handful of people. Sometimes they can also do it where they only select one contractor. So what are your options then? Okay, well, you can subcontract to the people who are getting those opportunities, and you can find that information through market research like Michael shared. But the other thing that you can do is perhaps you go back to the SLED market for a little while, because I used to also work at a local city agency. And I know a lot of the city agencies around the country, they basically don't have the set asides like the feds do, but they do a lot of things through basically open low bid procurements, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, if you could just figure out how to bid and estimate on that project, maybe you don't have to have all of the extra steps that you would have to do the federal side of things,
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point. And, when people think a lot of times about procurement readiness, I think a lot of folks just focus on where am I registered? Do I have my statuses, certifications, all those kind of things, even the stuff we've been talking about today, where one of the things to accelerating your performance in government and being procurement ready for the government is having past performance. And you can enter this market and really have an uphill battle if you've never done this. Whatever this business is that you have. So if you decided, hey, I'm working for a construction company and I'm really tired of working for that guy that runs the business, so I'm going to go start my own construction company and I'm going to go win government contracts. And then you have zero past performance with your new company. So part of your challenge to becoming procurement readiness is you've got to go win something.
Right.
So go win some small contracts at that city level or whatever it may be and get some of those under your belt. Yes, you can map your past experience to the government, but that's a harder sell. The other thing is teaming. I think people For whatever reason, I think teaming just has this dark cloud over it to some degree, when I think it's one of the best things you can do is to accelerate your procurement readiness as you're going through and you're getting registered in the websites, you're getting your statuses, you're getting whatever schedule, if you need that sort of thing. You go and you find some teaming partners and you get some sub work so you can actually learn the business. And those things go into being procurement ready for you to be a prime. That's almost prime ready is almost what you would call it. Like, it's hard to be prime ready when you're brand new, you have zero experience, zero past performance, and you're trying to figure out how to be a government contractor and also, how to do the work.
Yeah.
There's just a lot to juggle there. So getting past performance is another piece of being prime ready, if that's another level in this whole scenario here.
Yeah. And, subcontracting in some instances, once they build a relationship with that partner that they're subcontracting with as a sub, if that's where they go first, when there's a opportunity, they can flip that around perhaps and have that prime contractor in the last opportunity be their subcontractor to support them. But that also takes time, because I've heard it a lot by prime contractors that they'll say, we don't want to jump into bed together right away. We want, let's date a little while, right? Before you form a joint venture, let's get a couple of projects, maybe some small work together under our belt. Well, guess what? That takes some time to do. You're not going to just see a solicitation open up in 30 days and basically have no relationship with it. Now, I won't say it hasn't happened, but it's going to be a lot harder to get that done, and really have a great thing at the ready. And maybe having that teaming partner or having the joint venture in place by the time the solicitation opens is going to be part of your procurement readiness plan, or really going back to opportunity readiness plan.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I do feel like contractors believe this is their only shot. This might be my only opportunity, right? And that's just not true. There's so many opportunities that, yes, there are some that it's a 5-year contract or whatever. We'll put that on your radar for later. But guess what? There are more opportunities out there. You don't have to feel like this is the only one. And if we don't chase it, we're locked out of the market forever. That's not the case. There's going to be another opportunity. There should be many opportunities every single month. And if you're struggling with that, then you've got to go back to your research and say, well, who else buys what I sell? Because maybe I'm looking too narrow or whatever, but there's opportunities coming out every single month. There's something you can chase. Use that as a learning experience for your next one.
Absolutely, man. And, just to kind of sum up some of the things that we talked about, you mentioned getting a checklist, and I mentioned putting time on your side. What I would recommend to everyone is that if you either have just lost an opportunity, so maybe you're in that seat right now, you're like, that just happened to me, right? Maybe it didn't happen yet. It probably will happen, but what you could do to prevent that from happening is, again, go back, do the market research. Those of you guys who are working with, PTAC counselors out there, or MBDA centers, or anybody that's coaching you up. It could be a private coach that's coaching you up. First thing that you want to do, get that market research done, identify the specific opportunity, like historically. So what historically was the most ideal opportunity? And it's say, this is what I want to do. Once you got that and you can get that solicitation, do two things. The first thing you do, if you want to print it out, but go through and read everything in that solicitation. Take a highlighter. I use a digital format, and I do this in my PDF software, but you can actually take a highlighter, highlight every instance of the word that says you shall, you will, you must, required, mandatory, because these are things that you must give the government either in your solicitation or in the performance of the contract. So you want to make sure, number one, you're ready from the compliance perspective. And so when you do that exercise, it's going to really help you out to do that. What are your thoughts on that, Michael? I lost my thought for a second. There was a part two to that. So.
Well, I've got two final thoughts for this, and then we can get into we can go to the Q&A portion of things. One is I do like going through the RFP, familiar yourself with all the requirements. Look for the FAR regulations that they put in there, because every single one of these will tell you what FAR requirements are there.
Right.
And so you can pull those out and familiarize yourself with the FAR sections that apply to what you're doing. And if you're a small business, if you are a specific set aside or whatever, there's specific areas of the FAR you can go look at for that as well. Familiarize yourself with that legal aspect of things. And then the second thing, to kind of talk about what you were mentioning, like with the audit. If there is anything in your requirements checklist that is a third party, such as an audit, DCAA compliance, CMMC, there's so many different things that require a third party. Anything requiring a third party should be high on your list. Like if it's a status that you're going after a certification, if it's a GSA schedule and you're going after it, any of those sort of things that require something outside your business, because you can do a lot of things inside your business, like your research, registering on website. So you can do all of that, and it's basically your time. But when you get a third party involved, in case nobody knew this, the government runs really slow. So anytime you submit paperwork to the government, it could be weeks, if not months, before you hear back. Last year, the government finally started catching up on GSA schedules, but I was telling our clients, look, if you need a GSA schedule, budget 2 years. It's going to take 2 years to get this freaking thing, because that's how slow the government is right now in GSA. They've gotten a lot faster. I've seen some done in a few weeks versus years now, but other things like the audits and things like that, you may reach out to an accountant and decide, hey, this is who I want to go with. And they're like, yeah, it's going to be a month before we can start the process. And then it's going to take 3 months. So anything requiring a third party, prioritize that high on your list to get them engaged so that you can get the ball rolling, because those things move so slow. And unfortunately, most of the contractors in the government space, consultants, you name it, move at the pace of the government. I don't move that way. If somebody needs help from us, I'm like, hey, if I can't help you, I'm going to have you assigned to a coach within the next 24 hours. Then that person's going to be meeting with you by early next week. We feel like you got to move faster than the government's pace in order to get stuff done. So yeah, those are my two big things. Familiarize yourself with stuff in the FAR. And if you got a third party that needs to be involved, get them involved early in the game. So.
Absolutely. And be willing to invest in your business along the way.
Yeah, it all costs money.
if you got to hire an accountant that's versed in GovCon, or an attorney that's versed in GovCon, or a specialized coach or something, definitely use all of the resources that are free to you, the PTACs, the BDAs. Yep. But there's going to come a time where your PTAC is not going to put together a joint venture for you. Your PTAC's not going to do audited financials for you. So if you want that future opportunity, and you see that this is a requirement based upon the historical opportunity, well, you need to go ahead and get it done, what you need to get done.
Yep.
The other couple of things that I was going to mention when I had a mind blank a while ago. So I mentioned going through and making a little checklist, highlighting all the words in a previous solicitation that said, you shall, you will, you must give us this, right? The second piece to that is to go into that and look at if it was a best value procurement, which means that the government has weighted factors on how they're going to grade your proposal. Go into that evaluation criteria for award and read it very carefully. And basically create your own grade. Like if it says, hey, we want to see like how many jobs you've created or retained in the last year, or how many construction projects, like for example, if you want to do a VA project, how many operating room constructions have you done? Because there's some special requirements to do build out work inside of a hospital or tenant improvements inside of a hospital. How many hospital jobs have you done, right? If you have none of those, your chances are going to be low. But if you have yourself enough time before the next one happens, it's like 2 years, you could start to say, hey, let's go and look for some hospital type work so we can get a few of these projects under our belts and show the past performance that we want to do to get this big $50 to $99 million contract. And then the last thing I will say about that, with that last solicitation in hand, if you go to your coach or your PTAC counselor or somebody you might be working with at the MBDA, I know a lot of the MBDA centers have a little advisement in this area. You have that opportunity in hand. Now you can use that as your case study and know exactly what to ask your coach or your counselor. Like, hey, what does this mean? What will it take to get this? And they can help you more specific to the opportunity that you're trying to get ready for. So I'll leave with that. Michael, what are your final thoughts on all of this? And
yeah, I think we really covered a lot of ground here. So I think at this point, I think it's Q&A time.
All right. So we're going to cut and we're going to go to our Q&A session today. So for those of you guys who are with us live and join the call, you're welcome to answer any questions. But for those of you guys who are not live with us, thank you for joining us for this episode today. Remember, gavology.com/issues if you want to either submit an issue that you're having or take part in a future show. You can register to join us in our Q&A. So I'll say goodbye to those of you guys who are not with us live, and we'll continue on with our Q&A. So let's go to questions. Tyrese, do we have any questions in the queue? Just post those questions in the chat queue, by the way.
Yeah, not yet. I just put, let us know if you have a question, and I put it in the chat box.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hey, Ellie.
I was going to say one thing, actually, Carol, that maybe you might want to mention is that the fundamentals series with the market research courses, maybe you might put a word in for that.
All right. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. So if you go to gavology.com/fundamentals, that's where we have our basic series of training that's pretty core to everyone. And you can go through there and get some good information. You'll probably hear some of the things we talked about, especially what I think is a good training in there relevant to this is forecasting. You know, Michael, you don't know this, but we have our guest speaker for next month, and Ollie's here. Ollie, I don't know if you know or if you or Adam's going to show up, but Ollie runs Totem Tech, and they take care of cybersecurity compliance. So, and they are also a really awesome defense contractor, small business himself.
I know Ali.
I bet Ollie's got some stories for us.
I know Ali. He and I might meet in Alaska at the Alaska conference next month.
Yeah, I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that I'm there. I'm balancing 2 weddings this summer, so if I can dodge those, and I will take you to dinner in Anchorage. I know a place.
Sounds good.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous, man.
So we run 2 companies. One is Haight Bay and Associates. We're a defense contractor. Out of that company came Totem Technologies, the one behind me. And what Totem does is we help small to medium-sized businesses with cybersecurity compliance, because we ran into such a heavy cost burden when we tried to start adhering to CMMC that it was impossible to hire someone to do that as a small prime. So I've heard Michael, you and Carol both talk about CMMC. I haven't seen any contracts that we're bidding on that specifically call out CMMC at any level. Now, I've seen a lot that talk about system security plans, plan of action and milestone, and NIST compliance. But I was just curious, are you guys seeing contracts let right now with the actual CMMC requirements embedded into them?
You know what I see a lot of, Ali, is really not named necessarily CMMC, but like you said, it's around the topic of cyber readiness. So, you know, whenever you come on with us, and hopefully I can get you here next Coffee and Issues podcast to talk about it, but it's not just the federal government that's looking at this. You know, all of the state and local agencies you may find inside of your terms and conditions that they require you to have some type of an incident response plan. If you get hacked or if you lose data, how are you going to respond to that? And I think that a lot of small businesses really are not really cyber ready. So whether you're calling it CMMC or whatever, you're starting to see cyber requirements in all of the solicitations, a lot of them, not all of them, so.
We picked up a subcontract from an organization here in Utah that is, they build magazines, bunkers that they store spent rocket engines in them. And one of the contracts that we picked up is actually hardening the infrastructure around that magazine. So all of the SCADA systems, the wirings, the cameras, all of the communications. And that's something that the prime contractor had no idea was even a requirement in their contract. So they spend $250,000 so far just hardening infrastructure that they built because they didn't read the PWS clear enough and didn't understand the FAR and the regulations behind these cyber requirements. So it's one of the things that worries me about small up and coming defense contractors. There's things that are written in these RFPs and these solicitations that we don't even understand. And we're so eager to get our first win or our second win or to add to our capabilities that we're just signing and affirming things that we have no idea. We don't even understand the price tag associated with them. Like, luckily, this company was a multi-million-dollar company that could afford $150,000, $200,000 hit to the bottom line. But a lot of us that are just starting out can't do that. So.
Yeah, that's why I also, not only to meet the requirements, I also tell folks when you go and you look at those, the shall, the will, the must, the required, the mandatory, not only is it just to meet requirements for compliance, but there's a cost with compliance that's necessary, and you need to be ready to expend funding for that cost, right?
Yeah, well, that's a big deal. Hey, I had a question come in on a direct message. It says, we are often told to research, find out who buys what you sell. And then they say, well, all major agencies buy our services, data, analytic services. How do we focus? So, Carol, I don't know if you want to touch on that one first. You want me to?
Well, all I will say about focus is, and this is the hard part for GovCon, because when you start talking about state and local versus federal, your sales process may be a little bit different, or maybe a lot different, right? So yep. That's what makes it a little bit challenging about government, because if you were to say, let's set up a proven sales process and just get the sales team and go out and do this over and over again, it becomes hard because what it would require to do a federal job might be different for a state and local. So what I just say is like, hey, focus on one agency, one opportunity at a time. If you see it coming up, study it, go back at that previous solicitation and a lot of the things that you're going to do. So when you build content for that proposal, it's going to be some of the content you can repurpose. A lot of it you can repurpose, for other solicitations. And you just need to pay attention to what's different in the other agencies. So maybe by the time you do this a few times, you can repurpose 80% of your, proposal, because it's like, hey, here's who our company is and who the resumes are, but in other situations, you always got to look to see what is different and how do I need to tailor to this opportunity.
Yeah. One of the ways that I like to focus is you can look at the top agencies. So who are the top 3 that are buying what you sell? And you can start there. That's a way. It's not random. They're the biggest buyers and we want to start there. And then within those, let's say you notice that inside DOD, the Army's the big one. Okay, well, within the Army, who is the biggest buyers of this? You can start to drill down with inside that to start to figure out with inside the Army, where should I focus first? And you may determine, hey, I really need to focus on Fort Hood. Another way to focus is where do you have any sort of affinity or relationships or anything like that? Instead of just saying, well, we're going to sell to the government, which is a really big thing. Like for me, I came from the Army. So I know the Army. I talk about Fort Hood because I was at Fort Hood, and so there's a lot of different ways like that where I may say, you know what, we could sell to anyone, but I have a background in the Army. I know about it. I know how it works. And so I'm familiar enough with it that that's where I'm going to go. Because I could sell to the Air Force, I could sell to the Navy, but I'm going to use my background and my knowledge to sell to this customer. And then it's where you start to drill down and say, well, who in the Army is buying this? And you start to look at identifying contracting officers and say, wow, I've noticed out of all this contracting officer's name keeps coming up over and over and over again. You can actually pull that data in SAM and break it out by contracting officer and go, wow, out of this organization, there's 7 contracting officers, and this guy's, is doing 10 times the work that all the rest of them are. I probably need to meet that person, right? That's somebody I need to meet. So you can drill down in little ways like that. There's almost no wrong answer. You just have to pick a path and say, hey, this is where we're going to focus. What I've found is as you start going down that path, you're going to make little decisions. Hey, I like this stop on the path, or no, I don't. Let's keep going. And you start to make little adjustments to your plan about who your market is. And you may start going down that road and realize, yes, the Army is who I want to sell to, but primarily the Army Corps of Engineers. So now let me blow up their organization chart and look at where the Army Corps of Engineers is located in my state or in the neighboring states or across the country. There's almost an unlimited way of drilling down and focusing. You just have to pick a starting point and start to, like I said, just drill down into it and start meeting people. So I hope that's helpful. There's a lot of ways to do it. So
yeah, I will add something to that too. Once you start doing the research, like Michael was suggesting, and seeing kind of who buys what you sell, think about opportunities like a radar. Like if you're out in, I know many of you probably haven't ever really messed with radars, but like when I was in the Navy, we would see the radar and there's like a blip on the screen, right? And there's another blip on the screen, and then there's another one, right? What I mean by that is that if you want to do business, you see those top 3 agencies that you've identified, or maybe 5, and you understand when those next opportunities are coming out, that would be the order that you would probably focus on. Like if the Army is coming out next, you say, okay, here's the Army. Well, the VA just happened, and they're not going to compete on the 5-year contract that I want to be on. So they're on my radar, but they're like 5 years out. And then what's after the Army, so that's another way to kind of focus in on your efforts. If you think about opportunities like coming in like that, because they come in and you kind of focus a lot on one. And then once that's done, you go to the other one.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, I see there's 2 more questions in here I want to make sure we get to before we have to hop off. One is about the most effective way to follow up after an RFI submission. Basically, they submitted something, they've reached out, and just crickets from the government. One is be a little patient. I know it kind of stinks, but sometimes there may be 3 people that respond to that RFI and the government can get right back to you. And sometimes there's 40. I'll give you an example of something just happened to us this week where, I don't know if you saw this, Carol, Josh put a post. We're doing some website stuff and needed some help. So Josh put this simple post out on LinkedIn. I'm not kidding. We've had over 300 emails, messages, and phone calls asking about that. And all we can do at this point is just say, we've got your message. It's going into our spreadsheet and we're working our way through it. Like there's no way for 2 guys to respond to 300 emails and phone calls like in a timely manner. It's just not going to happen. And so the biggest thing is to be persistent with the government, but also, like, if you're just focused on that contracting officer, go outside of that contracting officer, reach out to the small business rep that's there, look at that organization at one of the program managers. Maybe that's somebody you should be talking to. And know that the RFI is just a piece of the process. They could be submitting an RFI in January that they're gathering information for 6 months for an RFP that may come out next January. So there may be a lot of time in that RFI process. Then again, it may be they submitted something in January because they want to put an RFP out in March. We don't really have any way of knowing unless the RFP stated that. But patience, keep reaching back out to them. Reach out to a small business rep, maybe a program manager, that type of person. But the biggest one is persistence, because look, it just, when you get 50 responses, how do you possibly respond to all that? Carol, any thoughts on that as well?
No, I think that was a great summary. And you're right. I mean, like even the contracting folks, they're just limited in how many folks they can get back with, so when there's a procurement, it kind of gets basically streamlined down into like a small group that they're actually looking at, which actually kind of leads us into our next questions, which is one of the big struggles for agencies like ours is that even after 20 years or so in commercial work, we were challenged to develop effective past performance that the COs will pay attention to. So, that's a hard question or comment to answer to, but what I would think, if I was looking at that and I had relevant past performance, obviously you're getting a grade on that. One thing that you could do is ask for a debriefing. And why did they rate you so low? Was it, the fact that you didn't have federal specific work, or were they looking for that in their evaluation criteria? Also communicate with the OSDBU person. That's usually the small business rep, because they're also an advocate for you, and say, hey, really, these requirements, if you look at them, it's just so restrictive. We got a ton of relative commercial work. Maybe the next time they do this, they can basically accommodate that a little bit more. So have that conversation if you can.
That's a good point. One of the things that I'll point out on this one is most companies, and when I say most, I mean the overwhelming majority, 95+% of companies, maybe even higher, are really bad about communicating their value. So you may have a past performance write-up and you think it articulates your value really well. And I will read it and go, this is just a bunch of jargon. You've literally used every single buzzword you could possibly think of in your market, and it's not communicating the value. So just because you have a past performance write-up doesn't mean it's any good. One of the things I recommend is going back. Carol, I believe you guys have some of these webinars with Josh on how to differentiate and communicate your value. There's some great webinars there around that. Josh talks about this relentlessly, about how to really properly communicate your value, with data and metrics, not just we did a project similar to this, right? Like you've got to get in depth to show them, hey, we've done this for 4,000 other companies around the country or whatever it may be. Like you've got to get better about telling your story and communicating your past performance, because anybody who stands out even a little bit in this area is going to get chosen, because again, most of the past performance write-ups are so vanilla with buzzwords that like people just gloss over it and are like, yeah, I don't know if these guys are any good. So
yeah, and fancy words don't win contracts. I mean, think about it, and you've got to face the facts and the truths for your own business, and really take the input that you're getting. And instead of just feeling shortchanged or like this opportunity was like geared for this other company, really look at the facts and where do you stand up to this other company and really being the best. Are you really truly the best? And if you're not, maybe that's an aspirational goal that you can work towards when you're looking at who won the competition and truly why they were selected for that win. And maybe there's going to be that competition, that same type of competition is going to happen in the past. And you can see now, what's my weaknesses and what can I do to truly be the best? Because, best value is best value.
Yep, that's right.
If you don't have it, you don't have it. And
you don't have it.
None of the fancy buzzwords or, You can pay a proposal writer $100,000 if you want to, but if you just don't have it, you just don't have it.
That's right. That's right. Hey, I think one of the last questions here was about, as a new business, would it be more advantageous to start with simplified acquisitions and BPAs? I don't really talk with our clients a lot about simplified acquisitions, just for the reason that it's not necessarily a favorite of a lot of contractors. There are contractors that use it, or contracting officers that use it. But as part of your homework, when you are researching your agencies, do they use simplified acquisition a lot? Again, every time you're looking into an organization, you have to figure out, how do they buy what you sell? Once you figure out the who, it's the how. And how are they doing this? And if they're not using that strategy, then you're just going to be spinning your wheels trying to go down that. I think this is probably, this question hits on one of the biggest myths about the government is, hey, there's this thing called simplified acquisition, and if it's under this threshold, they can just buy from me without a lot of paperwork. It's sort of true. But then again, nobody likes to use it, or not. I say nobody. A lot of people don't like using it because they do run into making sure they've justified using it. And there's a whole lot of reasons. But it's like saying you only have a hammer in your tool bag. You've got to have a whole kit of tools, and simplified acquisition might be a way to get the deal done, but you've still got to meet the contracting officers, maybe even the PMs, the small business people, know what the customer wants and needs, justify that there's a reason for them to do business with you. And then the simplified acquisition piece is sorting out the acquisition of it. Like, there's all this marketing and stuff that has to happen. And if all of that falls into place, then we can choose, does this happen on a GSA schedule? Does it happen in open competition or a set aside? Does it happen through simplified acquisition? There's all those little pieces, but that gets into the actual execution of getting the contract versus all the marketing that has to happen pre-acquisition. And so we can't forego all of that other stuff and try to go, well, just give me a contract under 250. Doesn't work that way. So I say no, don't focus on that. Focus on teaming and doing sub work if you're brand new, and get that right, and then move into becoming a prime.
Yeah. And on that note, I wanted to give one more procurement readiness tip. Ali, do you have any comments on?
Well, I just wanted to thank you both. I've been in defense contracting for probably 15 years. As a small business owner myself for the past 7, and just coming to these as refreshers and just getting an education, and just thinking back on some of the things that I'd struggled with in the past and then had forgotten all about. This is extremely powerful, not just for those that are trying to break into this market, but for those of us who are already here and may or may not have been set in our ways. So I appreciate it, Carol. Your insights, your knowledge, and Mike can't be beat, man. So thank you guys so much. And
thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. And I'll give you a little plug here too. We put I noticed that Tyrese put in your upcoming CMMC webinar on Gavology. So we want to thank you for being a partner. And I know that you've been on Michael's podcast before, so I appreciate you. I know Michael does too. So we can say we appreciate you being out there, sharing your stories from the trenches to help other small businesses.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy you guys let this ugly mug on your on your screen. So thank you.
Hey, I want to say one more thing before we head out today, Michael, and it's related to procurement readiness. And somebody made a very good comment, which lady who used to be a former procurement person, looks like we lost Michael. Hopefully I'm still going, but made the comment about contractors waiting to the last minute to submit their proposal, and then they run into a snag. What I will say is that make sure that you have somebody on your team understanding where the point of submitting the proposal is on time. So many contractors run up against this every year, probably millions of dollars lost because they were 1 minute late. You might as well be 1 year late. Early on, go into the proper portal, make sure you can get set up, because some places it takes a little processing time. Even if you went the same day, like, okay, I'm ready to submit, boom, create an account. Oh, by the way, it takes 48 hours to basically get your account set up, or you could find yourself into that situation. So that was a great procurement readiness tip. So thank you for sharing that.
That's a great one. All right, everybody. I think we'll see you next time, right?
Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next episode.